It's a story only told among the most hardcore of the hardcore. Very few know of it in its entirety. I myself only learned the full story a few years ago. This, my friends, is the story of Ninetndo. Our quaint little tale starts in the arcade. Ninetndo had just come out with a game called Radar Scope in Japan. It was a marginal success and a complete failure in the US. So they decided to reprogram all of the Radar Scope machines with that of Donkey Kong. It became an immediate success. In fact, so much that it's a pop culture icon even today. In fact, you can watch the movie The King of Kong to get the gist. But there was a problem later on. For one thing, the arcades were crashing, and the video game home market was in even greater peril. Thankfully, Ninetndo came out with a little device called the Famicom in Japan. This piece of hardware was a game console like no other. It had unsurpassed graphics for the time, aside from what was seen in the arcades. And in fact, games like Super Mario Bros., Metroid, The Legend of Zelda, Kid Icarus, and Mother. Oh, and of course Dragon Warrior, but that was only a success in Japan. But anyway, those games, they were extremely popular, but before all that, Ninetndo had a struggle. How would they market it in the US, where the market for video games was dying? So, they decided to try it out in a little store in New York City. The Ninetndo Entertainment System was a flop. So, they tried it again in California. It was a success. So, packaged with Rob the Robot, an accessory that played games with you, and eventually Super Mario Bros. And the light gun game Duck Hunt, the Nintendo Entertainment System was a huge, phenomenal success. It brought video games back, at least in the home. So, after much hard work, Nintendo decided that their Game & Watch line of portable games that was a moderate success in both Japan and the US was outdated and needed replacement. So, they created the Game Boy, a portable system that basically let you take all kinds of games on the go with a cartridge swapping feature rather than like the Game & Watch, which had all the games on one device. Games like Super Mario Land, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and many more to come in future Game Boy lines that are far too many for me to discuss here. All those, oh yeah, Tetris too, they really brought a huge success for Nintendo. So, after the start of the Game Boy, Nintendo realized they needed to upgrade their hardware to stay competitive with the TurboGrafx 16 and the Sega Genesis, the latter of which was a 16-bit system. The TurboGrafx is sometimes called a 16-bit system, but it was truly 8-bit. A misconception by false advertising. Anyway, Nintendo came out with the Super Nintendo, and sequels to all those famous games were made. But the problem was, there was no CD drive. The Sega Genesis had a CD attachment, and there was a TurboGrafx CD attachment as well. So, what did Nintendo do? Well, they decided to team up with Sony to create a CD drive. Well, that deal went sour for reasons still unknown. But instead, they teamed up with Philips, and Philips broke away from the deal for, again, reasons that I do not know. and they took with them some of the Nintendo licenses. So there were two owners of the Nintendo licenses, Philips and Nintendo, and on the CDI were some of the worst Nintendo games ever. I will not even discuss them. So then, right around that time, Nintendo decided that they should release games in 3D, something not really done that much even today. So they released the Virtual Boy, a 3D headset type game console where you looked into stereoscopic graphics with red and black visuals because it allowed you to see the 3D effect better, but it hurt your eyes. Now, there were some more games, there were some good games for it, like Wario Land and Mario Tennis, but overall there weren't that many, and the Virtual Boy was seen as the one true Nintendo failure. So, Nintendo, at the same time, was developing the Nintendo 64, a real success. They were making it a 3D system with full 64-bit graphics, better than the Sony PlayStation at the time. I don't need to tell you how big the 3D revolution was, with games like Banjo-Kazooie, Super Mario 64, and Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. So, after all that was done, Nintendo released the Nintendo GameCube, their first CD system, and unfortunately a system that did not use full-size DVDs that the competitors were using at the time, so a lot of games had to be put on 2 discs. Now the problem with that is that it brings up manufacturing costs, and in the end it makes the consumer pay more. Nintendo learned from their mistakes, though, with the Nintendo Wii, a motion control device with a Wii remote that basically let you point at the screen in light gun fashion and at the same time move it around with your hand to transfer those motions into the game. Now, they also released attachments for that, like the Wii Motion Plus, which made it more accurate. And in fact, there were so many attachments that I forgot to mention earlier for the other Nintendo systems. I'm not even going to bother, but there are a lot. And, of course, following the Game Boy, released prior to the Wii by about 2 years, the Nintendo DS, which had 3 iterations, brought touchscreen gaming to the masses, followed later by the iPod Touch, and of course the iPhone, which are pretty much the same. So, that is the basic story of Nintendo. Of course, there's a more in-depth story, but what can you fit in a YouTube video?